There it is. What's up, guys? Welcome to WYA. Super thankful y'all are here tonight. I was really sad to be out last Sunday. I thought I had pink eye. Turns out I didn't, which was really good. I was thankful that I didn't. But Talon did a great job if y'all are here last Sunday night. And then tonight, David Schuler is going to be speaking because this is part of our kind of month-long series called WYA Speak, where people from within our ministry kind of give a word that the Lord's placed on their heart. But really glad that you guys are here tonight. Something really encouraging and cool is I talked to somebody tonight. They said that they typed into ChatGPT. They were looking for community. And Warren popped up, which I didn't tell him I was going to say that. But I think that's too good not to share. So really appreciate you guys being here, especially if it's your first time. Just to worship, hang out, have a good time. A couple things to know is we are going on a beach trip June 13th. And we want you guys to be there. Yeah, sign up. You can scan that QR code. It's free. We're going to carpool. We'll go hang out on the beach all day. And then if you want, we'll do dinner that night at Caligny Beach and then come back. And then also, just want to let you guys know, a big part of our ministry is life groups. And we have life groups Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So there's plenty of opportunities for you to get plugged in one. And we'd love that. But just super thankful that you guys are with us tonight. Excited to hear a word from David that God's placed on his heart. And again, if you're new, just grateful you are here.
Well, it is good to be back here on Sunday night. If this is your first time joining us, glad you chose to come spend your Sunday nights here with us at Warren Young Adults. If you don't know me, or if we have not met, my name is David. I have been given the privilege of speaking tonight. And I'll go ahead and share a little bit about myself. So, a few years ago, in the beginning of 2023, put it simply, I was very unhappy, very discontent with my life circumstances. Essentially, at the time, I was a fresh, new believer, and the Lord immediately dealt me with a test. Immediately gave me two choices. There was one choice that I wanted to make, and then there was one choice that I did not want to make, right? But eventually, I decided to make the choice that ultimately my friends and the Lord were pushing me to make, even though I was fighting, I was kicking, screaming, pulling teeth, not to have to make this decision. So to give a little context, there was something in my life that I was holding on to very, very tightly, but if I had held on to it any longer, it would have prevented me from growing closer to the Lord. So the Lord tested me, said, let it go, and watch me work. And I did. Needless to say, it was very, very difficult, and I had a very hard time trusting God during this situation, which led me to be, as I mentioned before, very, very discontent. Now, the circumstance lasted for, I'd say, about half the year or so before the Lord finally revealed to me what it is he was working on. And when he did reveal it all, my attitude, perspective, outlook, everything changed, right? I had no reason to doubt the Lord to begin with, and I should have just trusted him the entire time. So fast forward, I guess, about 3.5 years later, things are fine now, right? And the Lord provided in only the way that he could have done. But that still does not change the fact that I was not able to be content during this time of testing. I knew something was going to work out, right? I was convinced in my mind that I could not say, Lord, I don't know what you're doing, because I knew he was doing something, right? But until that time came, I was asking myself, during a time like this, when it feels as if I'm drowning, how can I be convinced to be content? So maybe you find yourself here tonight and you're facing something similar, or you're going through something really tough right now. Well, you're asking that same question, how can I be convinced to be content, right? But I think an argument could be made that us as sinners, we don't do a very good job of being at peace during those difficulties, right? And whether that's because we forget God's promises or we doubt that he'll just even deliver on them, right? Whatever the case may be. But if there's one thing that we can take away from the Bible, from the Word, from what he's revealed to us, is that the Apostle Paul, was right there with us, right? I mean, he was no stranger to trouble or turmoil. He was shipwrecked, he was beaten, he was scorned, mocked, all the above, right? You name it. Essentially, he had every single reason to be discontent. But he still said the opposite. He was still able to rejoice in the Lord and his peace. Now, before I go further, I want to clarify that I'm not trying to downplay anything that you have gone through, are going through, or may go through. Times can be really tough, and I completely understand that. So I wanted to dive into a couple ways to help with that, right? So to kind of give a good idea of Paul when he's facing these trouble and turmoils, I want to quote an excerpt from a sermon by Matt Chandler. The sermon is titled God is for God. The sermon's not necessarily about Paul, but he does a really good job of kind of illustrating how Paul would deal with certain things. So he says this: the Apostle Paul, just an untouchable man. You couldn't do anything to him. He was just unfazed. And he was very hard-pressed. Imprisoned, beaten, shipwrecked at least twice, maybe 3 times. And he gets bit by a snake after being shipwrecked, but you just couldn't touch him. All right, Paul will kill you. Well, to die is gain. All right, we'll leave you alone. Well, to live is Christ. Okay, we'll torture you. Well, I have considered the sufferings of this present time not worth comparing to the glory that's going to be revealed to us. You could not touch him, right? I mean, a lot of times, honestly, when I'm faced with trouble, something hard comes my way. I'm like, oh my gosh, why is this happening? I hate everything about this. Why? But not Paul, right? So it's like, what's the secret? What is it that Paul had that we don't, right? Well, if you have your Bibles, we're going to flip to Philippians 4, verses 10 through 13, and we'll attempt to answer that question of why Paul was so content. And maybe we can answer that question ourselves of why we can be content like Paul. So go ahead and read 10 through 13. It says this: I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at length you have revived your concern for me. You were indeed concerned for me, but you had no opportunity. Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. So, if you're taking notes, it's the title of the sermon, Being Content. First point I want to make is why. Here is why we can be content. So, to provide a little context about what Paul is speaking about, he's essentially expressing gratitude towards the church in Philippi for their partnership with him in advancing the gospel. And he's always super grateful to receive their support, but the point is that even when he does not receive the support, he's still at peace. He's still at peace because he knows the Lord will provide. So to provide an example of my own life, a couple of years ago, I was fortunate enough to go with the church to London on the mission trip, and with that, I was tasked with support raising. I'll be honest, it was a very daunting amount that I had to raise, but ultimately, the Lord provided the amount I needed, and when he did, it was a very secure feeling, knowing that, hey, I don't have to, pay off the rest of this trip on my own. Like, this is covered, right? And I'm super thankful for that. But if we zoom out a little bit, like, that was one time for me. That was one time. If we look at Paul's life, right after his conversion, he's doing this for a living, essentially, right? And there were plenty of times when he did not receive the support from the churches, and he was still at peace. He was still at peace. A lot of times we think that we can finally be content when we get blank. Like, insert whatever you're longing for. Is a marriage, a higher paying job, beautiful house, right? Whatever it is. And then we finally get what we're longing for, and we think, man, it's not enough. It's like, I want more, right? Like, nothing ever seems to be enough for us. We're always craving something more. So something I've kind of taken up in the past couple months is collecting cologne. I like to collect cologne. I think it's kind of cool. You kind of dive into the different scents and everything, like the different notes they have to like make the fragrances. And on top of everything, you get to smell nice, right? But past couple of months, I've been working on my summer lineup, if you will. So I've got a couple right now. So I got like 2. I was like, okay, yeah, those 2 right there, those will be like really good for like daytime, like high heat and stuff. Like, yeah, it'll be really good. And I got this other one that's also summer, but a little bit more of like a nighttime scenario, a little bit cozier, if you will. And I have this other one that is better for like weddings and banquets, special occasions, stuff like that, right? So I think I'm set. But then I see one more. It's like, I gotta have that one, right? Yeah, I gotta have that one because that's gonna fill the gap between this cologne and this cologne. I'm gonna be able to wear it this, and this occasion, right? But I tell you, it's just a vicious cycle. It is just a vicious cycle, right? So back to that question I asked earlier, it's like, what is it that Paul had that we don't? The answer is nothing. In fact, the answer to Paul's difficulties was Christ. And that is someone we all have the opportunity to abide in, right? I mean, going back to always longing for more and thinking what we have is not enough. I'll tell you what, for Paul, Christ was enough. For Paul, Christ was enough. Take a look at John 6:35. It says this: Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. Jesus is the one who satisfies. Jesus is the one who satiates. Jesus is the one who fulfills, right? And Paul knew that. Paul knew that. And maybe you are like Paul, right? Maybe you're like Paul and you have Christ in your life, and that is awesome. That is great. But you're still asking where that peace is. I can't find the peace. Like, where is it? You're still wondering where it is, right? And if that's the case, I would ask the question, are you focusing on it? Or to use another word, are you abiding in him? Are you remaining in God, right? So it's going to lead me to my next point. Okay, the first point, Paul tells us why we can be content. So now we're going to look at how. Here's how we can be content. So we'll flip back a few verses to verses 6 and 7, where Paul reveals to us how. He says this, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. I think it's important to note here that Paul doesn't say it may guard your hearts. It's like, oh yeah, it might do that. No, he says it will. It will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Well, how did Paul know that? Because Paul was in prayer. He was in communion with God, and that allowed him to always experience God's peace. He was able to remind himself that through prayer, through communion, that Christ is always with him, that Christ is not going to leave, that Christ will guard his heart and his mind. And he knew that because he had seen God show up in various circumstances. So, if you're familiar with the book of Acts, there's a portion in chapter 16, verses 25 through 34, where essentially Paul and Silas are in the jail cells, right? And they're in there with a couple other people. But then there's like this giant earthquake that happens, and it shakes open all the doors, right? So all the prison doors open. You got to run, get out of there. But Paul stays. Paul stays. He doesn't run out of the jail cell. Paul had enough peace from the Lord to trust God, to trust that he, Paul, was in the right place, right? I mean, there's a jailer as well, right? He was the one who's keeping guard of all the prison cells, right? Well, as soon as all those prison doors fly open and all the prisoners run out, the jailer's like, oh my gosh. It's like, I'm going to receive such severe punishment for this, I have to kill myself, right? He was going to kill himself to avoid that punishment. But somebody was there. Somebody was there to stop him, and it was Paul. Paul said, wait, don't do that. And he ends up converting. The jailer ends up converting. Paul had enough peace to trust God during that time, and he knew that because he was in prayer. He was in communion. Now, if I'm honest, there have been plenty of other times in my life where I have not been content, more than what I previously mentioned. But I'll tell you that through prayer and abiding in God, even though my circumstances did not change, even though I did not want to pray, even though I did not want anything to do with God at that moment, I was able to experience God's peace when I was in prayer. But to be a little more specific, there was something I was holding on to. I was holding on to control in my life, but I finally decided to let it go and trust the Lord with what I was grasping on, and it brought me peace. I let go of it, and it brought me peace. Now, whether you're doing the same thing or not, I believe that the same can be true for everyone who abides in the Lord, for everyone who spends time with him, that you can experience God's peace. So what does that look like, spending time with the Lord? And exactly how much time are we supposed to spend with him? Well, let's take a look at Paul again, right? In 1 Thessalonians 5:17, Paul tells us to pray without ceasing. Pray without ceasing. What does that look like? Now, if I'm interpreting this wrong, I'm sorry, please correct me, but I don't think that Paul expects us to be in prayer every single second of every single day. But as David Guzik puts it, there is room for us to be in an every moment of the day fellowship with God, with our Creator. And if we go back to the text, Paul tells us how we can do that, right? He tells us how we can do that in verse 6, where he says to present your requests to God. Now, whether that is actually meant to say presenting all that you desire to the Lord, or to simply to just be with the Lord, I think the point is that we can all be honest with ourselves that we maybe don't spend as much time with God as we ought to, right? I mean, God is offering us this peace that we can experience with him, and he makes it so simple. yet we are so quick to make it complex and difficult. So my challenge to you this week is to intentionally spend time crying out to the Lord during those difficult moments of the day, during those difficult moments of the week, right? Whether that be in the car, before breakfast, before bed, whenever, right? And maybe this week will be really good for you, and I really hope it is, right? And you won't have any difficulties. But the point is, can you find time where you bring your thoughts, where you bring your desires, where you bring yourself to the feet of the Lord? I mean, honestly, we don't have to have a bad week to make ourselves anxious, right? To disrupt the peace that God has given us, right? I mean, we do a pretty good job of that on our own. So it's like, how do we overcome that? How do we use what Paul has revealed to us to experience God's peace each and every day? So that leads me to my final point. It's like, what now? If Paul reveals to us why we can be content, and he tells us how we can be content, it's like, what do we do now? What do we do with that information? So finally, we have to think on these things. It is not just enough to know about them, but instead we should be dwelling upon them, because what we think about, what we dwell upon, what we mull over can ultimately shape how we view life, how we view various circumstances. So, to continue with Philippians, I'm going to read verse 8. It says this: "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things." So Paul has revealed to us why we should be content and how we should be content. Finally tells us to think on these things, right? To keep them in your mind. Or to use another word, meditate. Psalm chapter 1, verses 1 through 3 states this: "Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He's like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, and his leaf does not wither, and all that he does, he prospers." So depending upon which version or which translation you are reading, the word blessed at the very beginning of the verse can be used interchangeably with happy. How happy is the one his delight is in the law of the Lord, right? Who meditates on it day and night, right? I mean, God tells us what happens when we dwell upon his word, when we dwell upon what is good, right? There was a time in my life when I was much more disciplined in memorizing scripture and meditating on the word. And during that time is when I found myself more naturally dwelling upon the word more, dwelling upon the truth more, dwelling upon what is good. So we need to consider what God has revealed to us and how we can make it more prevalent in our lives, how we can continuously live that out. But there's a flip side. Unfortunately, we need to do more than just dwell on what is good, right? Because we also need to be on defense. We need to be on defense from what is evil, right? Because the enemy is somebody out there around every single corner waiting to devour us in our joy. 2 Corinthians 10:5 says this: "We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ." So we need to be on guard for both directions, right? Doing our best to detest evil and cling to what is good, right? As what Romans 12:9 states. But that's honestly kind of a lot to think about. So I think you could really boil it down to, what are you dwelling on? I mean, if you were only dwelling upon the negative, there's not going to be much room for positive, right? If you're only dwelling upon what is evil, it's going to drown out what is good. What are you dwelling on? Again, disclaimer, I don't want to downplay or belittle anyone's situation. Maybe you are in a very tough place right now where you are forced to think on stuff that you don't want to, and it fills your mind. But I think there's comfort knowing that when we stay focused on the Lord, when we remain in him, when we remain dependent upon God, he keeps us in peace. Isaiah 26:3 says this: "You will keep the mind that is dependent on you in perfect peace, for it is trusting in you." If you remain in God, you will remain in peace. So as I close, I want to leave you with a practical way to do this. So last year, I was in a Bible in a Year reading plan with a group of guys. Each month, we would have a monthly call talk about how we've been doing with the reading, what we've taken away from it, how we can encourage one another, all that kind of stuff. And then one of the calls, the leader teaches us about the word dayanu. If you're not familiar with the word dayanu, it's a Hebrew word that translates to the phrase, it would have been enough, or it would have sufficed, right? It stems from the book of Exodus. It's not in the book of Exodus, but it was used in song form as a way of expressing gratitude towards God for delivering the Israelites, specifically for all the miracles that God performed as he led the Israelites away from Egypt, right? So, for example, one of the lyrics goes like this. If he had split the sea for us and had not taken us through it on dry land, it would have sufficed us. And then the next lyric follows with this. If he had taken us through the sea on dry land and had not drowned our oppressors in it, it would have sufficed us. So the writer almost uses it as like a stepping stool, almost kind of like break down each time the Lord has provided for them, saying that even if he had just done this like one thing and not this other one, it would have been enough. Right? So to kind of walk you through it in your own life, here's kind of what it looks like for me. So if God had saved me, but had not provided the comfort for me during my first test, it would have been enough. But then if God had provided the comfort for me during my first test, but had not led me to Warren, it would have been enough. And then you build on that. You do this over and over again, and you begin to realize just how much God has provided for you, just how much he has been there. So the last thing I want to do is ask you a question. Is Jesus enough? If you look back on all that you have been through, can you say that Jesus is enough?